Hey, I'm Gregg and welcome to my video. If you haven't seen my videos before, I'm creating a series of videos which is kind of self-documenting this journey I'm on to self-awareness. And in the same time, I'm asking for you to also leave your comments and experiences as a way that we can possibly help each other. So today I'd like to talk about my terror of death. During this time, something happened to me. I mean, I was so badly beaten and so tired and so just exhausted. I just couldn't fight anymore. But I started to just accept that this situation was how I was going to die. So it's been a long time coming, but today is absolutely beautiful outside. The sun is shining, it's feeling warm, or the weather's certainly getting warmer. And I think that's put me in pretty good spirits and it's helping a lot to sort of tackle today's subject matter. As I said in the intro, today I'd like to talk about my terror of death. And the reason why I'm talking about this is it's not something that's new. It's something that I'm aware now in reflection I've had for many years since I was young. However, it's become a lot more prominent since my accident last year. And I'm starting to sort of make lots of connections. And so I want to share them with you and hear what you have to say. So stepping back to last year, I had an accident where I fell down my staircase here at home and I knocked myself unconscious. And several hours passed and I was laying upside down on the staircase, bleeding everywhere. It was like a horror movie. And I managed to sort of gain enough consciousness to sort of get back up the stairs into my lounge room, where I collapsed again for several more hours. And at which point I was able to gain consciousness, get help and go to a hospital. But what followed that was this fear of going to sleep. I was petrified. It was almost like I'd been told that you had your chance, you got back up the staircase, you got help, but that's it. Your chances are over. And as crazy as that sounds, this is kind of the story that was going on in my head. And this progressed worse into having panic attacks. And these panic attacks are really as terrifying. I'm not really quite sure how to explain them. But essentially it's like this wave comes over me and my body becomes extremely tense. And I become acutely aware of every sound and every movement around me. And during this moment, I feel paralyzed. I feel really unsafe, but I'm paralyzed from my legs down. I can't move, I can't run. So I'm in this kind of fight or flight situation, but you know, there's no way that I can run away. And so it's just this incredible tenseness in my body that I'm preparing to fight the situation at hand. And they occur at any time. I'm not exactly sure of any one particular trigger that sets this off. It can be walking down a crowded street, it can be in a supermarket, it can be waking up in the morning. It's just literally something makes me feel unsafe. And as soon as that happens, this wave washes over me. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And I relate it, what I've discovered is that I can relate this feeling to a situation that happened several years ago. And that was, I had a home invasion. A number of people, I have no idea how many people, break into my home and two guys pinned me down onto a bed in the house, one holding my hands above my head and the other holding my legs down. And some psychotic guy who was so drugged out, I just wasn't able to make any sense of what he was saying or what he wanted. There was no reasoning with this guy. He was just literally beating the shit out of me. And of course, at first, I was really struggling. I was struggling to break away from these guys, and and I was struggling to try and negotiate with this guy, offering him anything that was in the house. And whilst this was going on, there was God knows how many other people who had come into the house and were ransacking it. And so there was just all these voices and screaming and noise. And this went on for a whole evening. This started around 11 o'clock at night and went through until 6 or 7 o'clock the next morning. During this time, something happened to me. I mean, I was so badly beaten and so tired and so just exhausted. I just couldn't fight anymore. But I started to just accept that this situation was how I was going to die. And the noises from the ransacking and the partying and whatever else was going on in the house just kind of faded out. And these guys who were screaming and beating me, the pain from that just sort of faded away. And this one particular guy who had a knife at my throat and was just repeatedly threatening to kill me. And I had no idea why. There was no explanation to this. There's no connection to me and these people at all. It was something that this group were running around London doing, and I was just this unfortunate victim in that. And although my memory of this occasion is not great, I can't really visualize the whole situation. That there's one particular thing that I do remember, and it's this guy holding this knife, and it was so close to my face, and that I could see the reflection of these eyes that looked absolutely terrified, and I didn't associate myself with these eyes. I just didn't connect that this was me. And as this sort of wave came over me, this kind of surrendering to the situation, I begin to realize that that this is me. And this guy had been cutting me all over, and I just kind of accepted the fact that I was going to die. Now, these panic attacks that I'm having, I think, are related to the situation, because although I'm not having these flashbacks that are creating this panic attack, it's very situational. It's when I feel threatened, and this paralyzing feeling where I can't get out of the situation, I can't run away from the situation, I think is very much related to being pinned down onto this bed, and I just kind of accept that, hey mate, this is it. This is over now. Just, you have to accept this situation. And this is really just terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying, because I'm not ready to die, and I'm not suicidal in any way. There's still a million things on my bucket list that I want to do and I want to achieve in life, and although a lot of those priorities have changed throughout this last year, and as I've started to become more self-aware, and it's made me think a lot about my relationship with death altogether, and how it has an impact or has an influence in my life. I recently read a book by Dr. Irvin Yalom, who is a psychotherapist and a very renowned psychotherapist. He has written many, many books. And what's interesting about him and the way that he writes is he uses examples of his patients. And they come and see him for whatever complaints they may have. And in this particular book, the real reason behind these complaints is their own fear of mortality. And it's happening a lot with people, obviously, who are getting older and realizing that, death is kind of on their doorstep. And what interests me most about this book, and I'll add a link to this book on Amazon or somewhere in the description below, is that it was really the first 5 to 10 minutes that it just sparked all these connections for me. And funnily enough, it sent me right back to childhood. Now, in this book, he mentions that sort of in our younger ages, up to 6 or 7, we experience death, and that's when we first become aware of death. And that's probably through something like a family member, a grandparent possibly dying, or a pet dying, for example. And then we sort of leave those years and we go into leading up to our puberty and through our puberty, where we don't really think about death that much. We're not really that conscious of it, and that's because it's much more about discovering our sexuality and procreation and all these things to do with generating life. And then afterwards, sort of in our sort of early teenage years, these adolescent years, death becomes more prominent again as we kind of struggle to really find our place in the world and who we are and where we fit into things, and hence why suicide is very common at this age. And I kind of, as I was reading this, I put my life into this sort of time frame that he was talking about. And what I found really interesting is that during these years of, not thinking about death and discovering your sexuality, etc., I became hugely influenced by a television commercial, as crazy as it sounds. And this television commercial was in 1987, and for me, it seemed like it went on for years, but it only ran for a short period of time. And it was about AIDS awareness. And the Australian government had decided that, given the rise of AIDS in 1984 and this kind of epidemic and, world stage that, AIDS was taking, they used a very scare tactic. And they created this commercial using the Grim Reaper. And the Grim Reaper obviously is death, and in this case, he's AIDS. And very strange effort to explain. I'm going to add a link to it in the description below. But essentially, the Grim Reaper is in this bowling alley, and where the pins normally come down on the machine, people are coming down, and the Grim Reaper is bowling his ball, and he's knocking these people over. Now, this advert is basically saying that AIDS doesn't discriminate. It's no longer gay men and intravenous drug users. It can now affect anyone. And so you see families and business people and a mother and a child all get bowled over. Now, if you watch the advert now, it's not that frightening, but you can imagine the impact that it has on impressionable young minds. And don't quote me for this, but I have a feeling that they actually showed this during family television time. So there's lots of controversy surrounding this campaign, and I think it was pulled earlier than it was supposed to run for. I think it was supposed to run for like 9 months, and it lasted 6 or 7 months or something. And a lot of reason for that cancellation of the campaign was because it inadvertently, the Grim Reaper by society was seen as a gay man. And so for people who already had AIDS, and of course this is before HIV, so it was just this incurable disease. It was the gays are going to kill you. Now, for me, this is really terrifying because I was at that age, I guess I was like 12 or 13, where I was already becoming aware that I like men and that I'm a gay man. And not only was I facing, extreme social pressure because of this. My family were religious and sex was taboo, and sex before a marriage was definitely out of the question, and that would send you to the gates of hell. Sex certainly wasn't talked about at all in our house. It was just really a very taboo subject matter. And of course, Australia was a very homophobic country at that time, as most countries. It was very, being gay was very misunderstood. And I think that, a lot of the religious groups kind of really saw this as God's way of correcting the situation. And, it was very topical. And for years, this was hugely topical. And this commercial in particular was saying, there's 50,000 Australians already infected. And, in the coming time, 2,000 of those people will be dead. And I think they make a reference to more Australians will be killed than what were killed in World War II. So this was like huge. And so not only was I struggling to kind of find my identity and accept who I was, I had this pressure from family and the church and society, and now we have this commercial saying, well, you're gay and you're going to kill everyone. And I just remember the kids at school, they would say, you're the gay reaper. And, this was this confusion, about, rather than supposed to be non-discriminatory, the Grim Reaper just became a gay man. So I'm not really quite sure how successful this campaign was and what they were trying to achieve. I think it just messed up a whole generation of people. And I think these long-term effects should be studied. So, for much of my life, I kind of just assumed that being gay meant that I'm going to die. And so death has always kind of just been there. And not to mention the fact that, I adapted this kind of behavior of my parents, which was this kind of slave, save, retire. You've got to work hard, you kill yourself working to save as much money as you can so that you can retire and then start living life. There's no such thing about enjoying the moment. It was about when you retire, you can start your life. And I've had these moments of panic, and I've had these moments of fear, and I've had these attacks for as long as I can remember. I just treated them very differently. I just treated them as, well, there's something wrong with me, which makes me different to everyone else. And then having had experiences like this accident recently, or the home invasion of several years ago, they've kind of given it more of a structure and more of a way of how I feel. So I'm not coming to any major point here. I'm kind of sharing these connections that I'm making. I would really appreciate for anyone that suffers, these panic attacks and particularly a fear with death or terror of death, that you share your experience. You know, I'd love to start a dialogue. I would love to hear your stories and share mine, and in some way help each other. And certainly, if you know someone or who suffers this, please share the video, or like this video, or subscribe to my channel. And I hope that through doing these videos, that I'm creating a clearer picture of my life, which has been completely deconstructed over this last 12 months, and as I'm trying to put these building blocks back together. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that I hear from you, and I'll see you at my next video. Cheers.